Welcome to another video. If you hear construction in the background, it's not my fault. This is, like, in my mind, another practice video, but I definitely want to use this practice video to talk about my son. My son is the book that I have written, and it's awesome, and that's the video. No, what I really want to do is smoke this joint, but I don't know if that's okay on YouTube to like smoke a joint while you're like, on YouTube. So like, I want to smoke this gradually and like talk about my son, because I want y'all to feel like I'm being genuine and honest, because I'm almost never genuine and honest. I know from watching Trixie Mattel's videos that doing an activity, whether it's putting on your geesh or smoking your joint, it's hard. I also feel like joint is such an old person thing for me to say. And the noise, like, I can't. Alright, I'm gonna talk about how I wrote my first book while I'm smoking this joint. You gotta like move the flame back and forth on the tip of the joint, because you don't want the paper or the leaf to catch on fire, but you do want it to get hot enough that it can start to burn, of course. Will I ever get hired again? It's funny because in my last video I said kids don't smoke weed the way that I've smoked weed. I'm giving them a really good example. My Son is the first book that I've written, and it's not going to be the last book, but because it's my first book, I learned a lot about the writing process, creativity, the world, and myself in the whole process. My Son was difficult to title, in fact, and I have a funny story about the title. So originally, while I was writing the book, it was two books. One a book of poetry, and the other a novel, a book of prose, so to speak. At some point, after I moved to New York City in 2021, the two books combined, and I realized I needed to write something that used both prose and poetry to tell the story. However, when I was writing the two books separately, I was calling the novel The Wicked, very similar to the movie Wicked. So I knew the whole time, like, you can't use this title. It's too generic. It's not good. I still kept using the title The Wicked even after the books merged, and I knew it was one book of both prose and poetry. So when I was in New York and I was like, well, let me like play with some titles, I like Google searched phrases in the Bible that had the words the wicked, because I was like, well, maybe there's a longer phrase, or maybe there's something in the Bible that I could use. Ernest Hemingway used to read the King James version of the Bible out loud with a poet, I think John Dos Passos, but Hemingway would read the KJV aloud in order to find like potential titles for his books. I believe The Sun Also Rises comes from the KJV. I was working on, my son, trying to find a title, and there's a phrase in the Bible called that goes, recompense of the wicked. So recompense became the title, which is a really funny thing to have as a book title because it's not a common word, and recompense is not a common word. And recompense, if you don't know what it means, Google it, because I'm really not good at explaining it, but recompense as a word means something you owe and then something you are owed. I just loved that word recompense, and eventually, I found that phrase in the Bible. I shortened the wicked, I expanded it to recompense of the wicked, and then shortened it to recompense. February, maybe March 2024, I had started making my work public, which I had not done heretofore. I'd always like kept my project a secret, kind of. Everybody knew that I was working on a project, but nobody really knew what it was about. And I started putting my poems online, and I was not using the title Recompense because I was still super uncertain about it. A theory that I have is that the creative process is not truly finished until you start sharing the creative work with an audience. Now, if you need to spend time not sharing the work with an audience, do that. For 3 years, I told people I was working on a project, but never explained what it was. So, that was necessary for me. It was only once I shared Recompense, the project, my first book, with an audience that the title came to me. It's sort of a funny story. I was sitting on the toilet. That is so gross. I don't want to put that out on the internet. I was in the bathroom and I was thinking about my father. And my son is all about the relationship I have with my dad and the relationships he had with both his father and his stepfather. And I was just thinking about, stuff that my dad would say or do while I was growing up. And one thing that came to mind, I remembered that my dad would do this thing where he would look at me with his eyes like teary and with just wonder in his soul. And he would say, my son. It was always so emotionally intense on his side that it felt almost masturbatory, honestly. Now, I don't want to put out on the internet that I, or my book, is this kind of like hate-filled, estrangement fest, like whatever treatment of my parents or like authority figures or family or God or whatever. That was so frustrating for me to try to, compete with. I don't know. But I remembered that back in February 24. And it was like a light bulb went off. People say that all the time, but it's true. It was like wind blew past my face. My son. That is the title of the book. I understand that my father would call me my son out of this kind of deep love in his heart, but there is such a sense on my end of ownership and just kind of, him saying my son for his own benefit. I only exist in relation to him and his trauma. I am not my own person. First and foremost, I am his child and nothing else. The reason why I think I labored under the false impression that Recompense would be the title of my book for so long is because there is a lot in my son that is about what you owe other people and what you are owed by other people. What do our parents, our siblings, our neighbors, our community members, our townspeople, people who share our political interests, people who don't share our political interests, what do these people owe to us as individuals? How much responsibility do we take for one another? And conversely, how much responsibility do I take for you? How do I reconcile? I can see that you as a person are unhealed and not living up to your best self and hurting other people in the process. How do I see all of that and let it go and say, I can't change the world, but I can change myself? You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't change other people, but you can change yourself. But you still have a responsibility to show up for other people. Where do you draw the line? How do you know what is appropriate in a relationship with somebody else? How do you navigate your trauma, other people's trauma, and the world as it is? But all of that being said, in favor of the title Recompense, the phrase "my son" is so much more evocative of all of the stuff that I've just said in the way that it manifests in the book. So this is what I mean. My son not just means my son in a family way. My son also has, as a phrase, heavy religious overtones. And then finally, it just expresses any kind of relationship of authority, a relationship of power. And that was what I was really interested in trying to grapple with in my own life. You know, I knew I couldn't write a book that was about a power struggle or a family or a political experience or movement that I had not been part of in some way. I just wasn't at that point in my journey as a writer. I do believe writers can write about things they've never experienced. I just was not in that place at the time of writing My Son. My Son as a title is just so much more particular to my experience and the particulars of the book that I've written out of my experience. Recompense is just a much more abstract way of summarizing in a single word the themes and the plots and the poetry of My Son, whereas My Son is much more straightforward and literal. When I've told it to people, they ask a question. S-O-N or S-U-N? And I love that. I would not title the book My Son, as in the planetary body, because I don't think that is... I think it's okay as a title, but My Son is just so evocative. And something I've noticed too, and I did not plan this, but it's a happy accident. My son, as a phrase, appears in a good number of different media. Movies, TV shows, books, etc. So as a result, it's sort of like built-in advertising. Always thinking. I'm always thinking, girl. And then a final thought that I've had about the title My Son is that often you see the journey of the artist parallel the journey of the artwork. What I mean by that is the book My Son, it is like I gave birth to it. It is as though it is my own son. And you see that with, say, Louise Glick's first book of poems, which she titled Firstborn. If, as a book, it is indeed my progeny, in what way will the cycles of trauma that I've experienced with my own father play out in the journey of ferrying My Son, the book, into its existence? Will it hurt me the way I've hurt my father? Will I hurt it, exploit it, abuse it, the way I've hurt, the way my dad hurt me, Freudian slip? And it's ironic to me that I chose a phrase that I felt such contempt and antipathy toward for the title of the book. Every time somebody says the title to me, oh, well, that's how it is with my son. Or, oh, I see that in my son. I get like a jolt of trauma from it. I'm like, oh, that is so not for me. Like, I don't like that, but I love it too at the same time. I'm sort of reminded of how people say, like, Trixie Mattel took her drag name from the abuse her stepfather used to, like, hurl at her. He would call her a Trixie to imply that she was effeminate as a little boy. And so Trixie turned right around and made that name her legacy. So I feel very pleased that I demonstrated an instinct as an artist that I recognize in other artists whose work I admire. Yeah, that's kind of the tea about My Son. It is the best book ever written. It is totally familiar and totally influenced by so many authors, but at the same time, completely original. I'm not just saying this stuff to gas myself up. I truly feel that I've written something that if I, as a little kid, whenever I was a huge reader, had found this book in the library, number one, my mom probably would not have let me read it because it would have a reputation of like violence and sex and incest and all this nasty, awful stuff. Number two, I would read it and probably not understand it totally, but the experience I would have of reading it would really change me. I'm gonna take me at one last good final of that joint. Ooh. Girl. Well, y'all, that's everything. Peace out from me. I hope you enjoyed learning about my son, and I'm going to be talking about it a lot more because I only talked about the title today. So, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in more videos, and I will always love you.